No, I agree with that. And equally, Chair, equally part of the, and I think Superintendent McKay referenced this earlier, part of the funding of these services through the periods when the college was at its low point was coming out of the, in quotes, surpluses that had been generated in that period. So exactly. So there was some of the funding was there in that period of time. So okay, if we can get material on that for you as well.
Look, and you'll try and get that to us as soon as possible.
Yes, I will.
Next week to give us a complete picture, because we don't have it from this.
No, I will take that.
Sorry. And now the next speaker indicated was Deputy Cullinane.
Okay, can I just say to the witness, as far as through yourself, Coherlook, that we as members of the Public Accounts Committee have no axe to grind. That we're dealing with an internal audit report which was presented to us. In fact, it came from a leak. We may have got it anyway over the course of time, but we're dealing with an internal audit report which was not done by us. It was done by internal auditing in Garda Síochána, and we have a responsibility to put questions in respect of that internal audit report. That's why we're here. That's why you're here. I mentioned earlier today, and the guy here was looking for some clarification. I mentioned that the Garda Commissioner had accepted that there was financial irregularities. The irregularities are set out in the interim audit report. It talks about non-compliance with the public financial procedures, non-compliance with the Garda Finance Code, irregular presentation of accounts, irregular transfer of cash from accounts, irregular opening of accounts, irregular opening or setting up of companies, and so on. That's the irregularities which the Garda Commissioner accepts. And I think everybody accepts that there was unacceptable practices and irregularities, or at least most people who have come before the Public Accounts Committee have. That's what we're dealing with. What we're also seeing, and this is most troubling for us, is that we can see what was done internally, or maybe what was not done, and we can also see what was not done externally. So from 2006 up to 2016, the Controller and Auditor General's Office was either shut out or was not informed. Right through 2006, we had the incomplete report. 2008 was being called the McGee report. 2010, the Nolan report. 2011, we had a report sent from the internal audit to the Commissioner, which was the paragraph that was removed, that paragraph that the internal auditor says he removed. And then in 2015, we had information and correspondence as well. Right up to the establishment of the steering group, right up to that point, from 2006 up to the establishment of the steering group, the Controller and Auditor General's Office was still not informed. The PAC was not informed. That's the realities. That's what we're dealing with. And we had the heads of departments, who are mainly civilian heads, in a number of weeks ago. And they pointed to, certainly Mr Barrett and Mr Kelly were of the view that internal auditors were frustrated in their work, that all of this was about dealing with these issues internally, keeping issues from the purview of the Controller and Auditor General and the PAC, internal auditors being frustrated in seeking documentation, in being able to do their work. That's what they've said, which chimes very much with the fact that these bodies were not informed. And that's where we are. That's the reality. So we're now at a stage where we now have middle management, if you like, within the Garda Training College, people who had roles there, and also others who still can't help us, still can't help me, and I don't know about you, Kyle, still can't help us as to why the information was not given to the Controller and Auditor General. Not one person in the room today has been able to say to me, this is why there was a blockage, this is why it never happened. We know information went up as far as the Commissioner in 2008 and in 2010, twice, where the Commissioner says information should be given to the CNAG. It wasn't done. So, first of all, to you, Mr Cullinane, can you understand my frustration with all of that? Can you first of all understand that's where we're at? Would you accept at this point in time that's where we're at as a starting point?
Not there, no. Deputy, because we have moved on, and I go back to the point I made a few minutes ago. All of those are missed opportunities. It should have happened. That is my firm belief.
But it's not. It's more than that. We know there are missed opportunities. We also, it isn't just about moving on. We have to understand why it didn't happen. because one of the things that the Garda Commissioner was clear about when she was in, there has to be accountability, there has to be transparency. When there was breakdowns in communication, if people did not do their job, it has to be noted, it has to be accepted, it has to be acknowledged. My point is nobody, not one single person, from any of the heads of departments who were in, to anybody sitting across from me today, has acknowledged a failure on their part. Now, if I stand corrected if anybody in the room is prepared to accept any failure, but so far, nobody. We'll have the Commissioner in next week, we may have to bring former Commissioners in at some point, but nobody has accepted, up to this point, that any of the mistakes that were made were on their watch or under the auspices of the offices that they hold. So, first of all, do you accept that? And second of all, do you understand then how that's difficult for me?
Could I just intervene on one specific there?
When Mr O'Coolan answers first, certainly, Mr Dunn, yes. So I put the question to Mr O'Coolan, and then.
Could you just repeat it again? Final part.
It was obvious that nobody has accepted any responsibility. So you're saying that these were past mistakes, but not one single individual in the room has acknowledged any mistake on their part.
That's just the point that I wanted to intervene on before you answer, because I think I did say more than once today that, and this is based on what the CNAG said this morning, I did say that I accept the CNAG's view that it would have been better to have informed the Audit Committee on the 15th of July. So, in terms of
okay, well, you accept that, and I accept that we should note that, and that will be accepted.
Yeah,
that's
so
the first acknowledgement, and possibly the only acknowledgement. And while you're on that subject, Mr Dunn, you were presented with a report for Mr Barrett on the 6th of July 2015. Are you familiar with that?
I am aware of it, yeah.
Are you aware of what Mr Barrett would have said? It was a very extensive report, so there was an awful lot in that report, isn't that correct?
It was what I would describe it as a distillation of the 2008 and 2010 reports. So that's what it was, yeah.
On page 2 of that report that he gave you, he says that annual published accounts signed off by accounting officers since 2005, in his view, stand compromised. That was his view. So you received a note from the head of Human Resources stating from his perspective that he believed, potentially or otherwise, that accounts were compromised. So surely you would have had a responsibility then to bring that information to the Internal Audit Committee, and also surely the CNAG's office should have been informed of that view. So why was that not done?
That was a view that an individual, so John Barrett, had, but I think I've stated it earlier this morning that it was very clear to me that there was totally incomplete information at that time, and that we needed to get more information. That was my view.
But this goes right to the heart of the problem, Mr Dunn, okay? Because it is a view of Mr Barrett, but every single time somebody flags that something should be done, that there's either compromised accounts, or that the controller should be informed, or that the Department of Justice should be informed, and it isn't done, people point to somebody else. What I'm saying to you, and I'm putting it to you, that Mr Barrett presented you with a report. You are the CAO. You're well paid to do your job, as we heard this morning. You have responsibilities in your role. You are made aware by the head of Human Resources that, in his view, potentially accounts were compromised. Are you aware of the Garda Síochána Act 2005? When you were in your role, you would have obviously understood that the Commissioner was the Chief Accounting Officer.
Yes.
Can we get up the Garda Síochána Act 2005, and specifically Section 45 of that Act? Because this is important for both Mr O'Coolan and Mr Dunn, and I'm going to come to Mr McCabe and Ms McMahon in a moment as well. First of all, are you aware of the 2005 Act, Mr Dunn?
Absolutely, I'm aware of it.
When you were in your role, you would have obviously had to read it to understand your responsibilities and to understand what was the role of the various different functions within Garda Síochána in relation to financial controls and governance and so on. So you'd obviously have to be aware of that. And I would assume, Mr O'Coolan, that you certainly would be aware of the law and an act. Sorry, do we have it? It's section 45. I would have signalled earlier that I was... yeah, that's it.
We hope it works.
Section 45, that's it.
I'm working at the moment.
Okay, well, I can go through it while it's coming up on the screen. It says that the Audit Committee shall advise the Garda Commissioner on financial matters relating to his or her functions. It goes on to say that the Audit Committee's duties under subsection 1A include advising on the following: the proper implementation of government guidelines on financial issues, compliance with section 22 of the Exchequer and Audit Departments Act, section 19, but also the Controller and Auditor General's Act. It goes on to say that the Audit Committee's duties are also to deal with the appropriateness, efficiency and effectiveness of the Garda Síochána's procedures relating to a number of issues, but including seeking sanction for expenditure and complying with that sanction, acquiring, keeping custody of and disposing of assets, risk management and financial reporting. So it makes it very clear that the internal audit in Garda Síochána has a very specific duty. So for internal audit to be able to report to the Commissioner, because it goes on to say it should then report to the Commissioner, it needs to get information. So that makes it all the more troubling then, Mr Dunn, with respect, that internal audit would not have got information when it should have got information. It also would be all the more troubling because internal audit then would have had a responsibility to pass on information to the Controller and Auditor General's Office, which we also know didn't happen until 2016.
I'm aware from what's been said in the meeting that that internal audit were frustrated that they weren't able to get information that they asked for. But let me categorically say that they never looked for information from me that I did not provide. So just to be very clear on that.
But also to be very clear, and I was clear with you this morning, they were very critical of you for not, in the first instance, presenting the information which you accept on reflection you should have done to the July Audit Committee meeting, but also they were critical of the way and the manner in which the information was presented in the September meeting, and we'll get clarity on that when we get the substance of the notes. So they were critical. My point is that there's a responsibility under the Garda Síochána Act for information to go to internal audit to allow them to brief the Commissioner and to comply with the Controller and Auditor General's Act. And they feel, internal audit themselves have told us that they felt that they were not in a position to be able to do their job because information was not given to them in time, and because information was withheld. So again, I want to put this to Mr O'Cullinane. It is absolutely unacceptable. Would you accept it's absolutely unacceptable that right up to 2016, all of those flags were missed, and nobody, from the Commissioner right down, informed the Controller and Auditor General's Office? Would you accept that that is, in terms of governance, in terms of compliance with the law and the Act, is absolutely unacceptable?
The point made by the Controller here this morning that it would have been preferable if he was informed.
And one last point I have then, okay, and at least that's accepted, because we're going to have to establish, and I've asked, just so the witnesses will know as well, I've asked in committee earlier on that the Controller and Auditor General's Office would furnish this committee with a report on what exactly were the obligations of Garda Síochána in relation to compliance with their Act, and also with reporting to them. I'm also asking you, Mr O'Cullinane, could you, or maybe on behalf of the organisation, furnish this committee with a report on what were the roles and responsibilities of individuals within Garda Síochána to report to the CNAG's office, or up to a Commissioner, and then the Commissioner reporting to the CNAG's office, because that doesn't seem to be clear. There's clear breakdowns I can see in either communication, or maybe people deliberately not doing what they were meant to do. We'll deal with that, but I just want a brief, if we can get one on that, if we can.
As it currently is the case?
And previously, from 2008 right up, if we can. And just one final question I have is in relation to the minutes of the 6th of the 8th 2015, which was again the minutes of the steering group in August, isn't it, in 2015? And on page 2, Mr Dunn, it says, the CEO then referred to tensions between various parties that may have built up prior to the meeting, and he felt, that is you felt, that the meeting was a good opportunity for those tensions to be aired and dealt with appropriately. What tensions were you talking about?
Talking about tensions particularly between Mr Barrett and Mr Cullinane. And I think those tensions continue to today, and that was a factor that we...
So was there tensions in the room that day when people came in?
There were consistent tensions.
There was also then on the same, on page 3, there was also then a very serious disagreement, was there not, between Mr Cullinane and Ken Ruane of audit, where it says Mr Cullinane said he was shocked by what had just been said by Ken Ruane. This was when Mr Ruane was indicating that he should contact the Attorney General. Mr Cullinane said that he was shocked by what had just been said by Ken Ruane, in that there was nothing complex or difficult about this issue, and why would the issue have to be elevated to the Attorney General's office without all the relevant documents and facts being in Ken Ruane's possession. He said he finds it extraordinary that without being in possession of the full documents or facts, that Ken Ruane was already concluding that it would be necessary to bring it to the attention of the Attorney General's office. Whose call would that have been to bring that to the attention of the Attorney General's office?
I'm just actually reading the minute there.
Would it be Mr Cullinane or would it be Mr Ruane? Would Mr Ruane have the? Would it be his call? Would it be his judgment?
The typical link between Garda Síochána anywhere and the Attorney General's office is through the Office of Legal Affairs. That's typically how it happens. This specific. I don't really know, to be honest with you, but that's the general position.
Move on.
You don't know.
What I'm saying to you is that
get the answer on that.
What I'm saying to you is that the interaction with the Attorney General's office, and in fact with any of external legal, is typically through the head of legal affairs. So that's
the point. All I wanted to acknowledge,
and I have no reason to believe it would be different in this
all I'm looking to it. All I wanted to put on the record is this. Again, we have a dynamic in a room where there was a meeting of the steering group. At this point, I've already dealt with this with you, where a decision was made at that point not to brief any external players, which would have included the Controller and Auditor General's office at that point. We now have Mr Ruane, who's signalling that from his point of view, he's head of legal, the Attorney General's office should be advised, and we have Mr Cullinane saying, I find that astonishing. Again, here's another external organisation, this time the Attorney General's office, and again it seems to be a view, let's not give them the information. Let's not raise it with them. There's no need here. There was a lack of urgency, a lack of understanding of roles right through this process, right up to the point when the steering group was in place. Would you not? Would you agree with that?
I didn't interpret this issue in that way. I can also say that I wouldn't have seen a general tension between Mr Cullinane.
On page 3, on the same issue, to bookend this, because
if I could finish,
you can, but I will say this to you, and then you can finish because it's important. The note does confirm it, because the second last paragraph, it says that he would be concerned if there was any suggestion, and this is Mr Ruane, that he should be constrained in so doing. KR said that any issues brought to the attention of the Attorney General's office would be done so. He's making it very clear, I won't be told what to do here by anybody else. This is my call. Would that be your understanding of what happened?
And that is reasonable, yeah. And what I wanted to say was, I can say that I didn't see any general tension between Mr Cullinane and Mr Ruane. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is that I would have promoted a difference of view in not just that steering committee, but any group that I would have been involved in, any team around the table. I've been regularly on the record internally in Garda Síochána saying that if I have two people around the table that have the same view, I actually only need to have one of them present. So I'm not concerned about differences of views in the room. I was concerned about tensions, but not about differences of views. And Mr Ruane is absolutely right that it is within his purview. So I don't see that as an issue.
Right, I'm moving on. Ms. Barry from the Department of Justice had indicated a while ago, a few minutes back, I forgot to call you in. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to go back to one aspect of Mr Dunn's evidence. He referred to a discussion with Mr O'Callaghan, the Assistant Secretary over Policing Division, on, in relation to these matters during August 2015. But our recollection is that, yes, both Mr O'Callaghan and I did have a discussion with Mr Dunn on the fringes of a meeting in the Attorney General's office, but it was on the 1st of October, so I want to make that clear. So it remains our position that we were, that the fact that there were issues in relation to the arrangements in the college was brought to our attention on the 1st of September by Mr Ruan, who copied a request for legal advices to us. So that's our recollection.
That's date wrong. So
okay with that correction of the date?
Absolutely.
Fine.
Yeah, I was
now,
going for recollection.
Now,
I'm not going to come in, but just at some